On the morning of the 14th of September 1939, just 11 days after Britain declared war on Germany, a battered Aberdeen trawler called Cambridge departed from Scapa Flow on what appeared to be a routine fishing expedition. Her crew wore standard oilskins. Her nets hung from the dirks exactly as they had for 15 years of hauling cod and haddock from the North Sea. She carried the same Kelvin K3 diesel engine that powered half the fishing fleet. To any German reconnaissance aircraft or U-boat periscope, she was precisely what she appeared to be, a 47M steel-hulled fishing vessel displacing 545 tons doing what British fishermen had done for centuries. Except Cambridge wasn't fishing for cod. Concealed beneath her fish hold behind false bulkheads that even her original owners wouldn't recognize sat a Type 128 AX at a direction-finding wireless receiver and a young Royal Navy sub-lieutenant with a notebook. Her catch that week would be something far more valuable than fish. The precise location, course, and wireless frequencies of 3 German U-boats operating in the MCH. This shouldn't have worked. Fishing boats were slow, unarmored, and carried no weapons. They lacked the speed to chase submarines, the armor to survive attack, and the legitimacy under international law to operate as warships whilst masquerading as civilian vessels. On paper, converting trawlers into spy ships was everything military planners called a half measure, too vulnerable to be proper warships, too militarized to maintain plausible civilian cover. Yet by May 1945, Britain's fishing fleet spy ships, officially designated special service vessels, but universally known as freighters amongst their crews, had provided intelligence that led to the destruction of 37 U-boats, the mapping of every German minefield in the North Sea, and the interception of over 4,000 encrypted wireless transmissions. They done this whilst maintaining such perfect operational security that German naval intelligence never recognized them as military assets. To the Kriegsmarine, these vessels remained exactly what they appeared to be. British fishermen too stubborn or too foolish to abandon their traditional fishing grounds. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't desperation. It was perhaps the most perfectly calibrated intelligence operation of the war, one that understood something profound about human perception. Military planners expected elaborate disguises and sophisticated technology. Instead, the British gave their spies the one disguise that required no acting. They simply kept fishing naval intelligence doctrine in 1939 was clear on proper intelligence gathering platforms. The Admiralty's own guidelines for electronic warfare vessels specified that signals intelligence ships should be fast enough to evade attack minimum 20 knots, carry sufficient defensive armament to discourage surface raiders at least 44 in guns, and possess the range to operate independently for extended period 6,000 nautical miles at cruising speed. The French Navy operated converted passenger liners for signals intelligence. The German Beobachtungsdienst used modified merchant vessels with dedicated radio rooms and professional intelligence officers. Even the Americans, not yet in the war, were designing purpose-built intelligence trawlers with reinforced hulls and enhanced communication suites. Standard military thinking emphasized stealth through speed and distance. If you couldn't outrun enemy vessels, you needed to operate beyond their patrol range. The idea of deliberately loitering in waters heavily patrolled by U-boat and surface raiders seemed not just risky, but operationally unsound. Captain John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, faced considerable skepticism when he proposed the Special Service Vessel Program in August 1939. The Deputy Chief of Naval Staff's assessment was blunt. Fishing boats are too slow, 8 knots maximum, too visible. They must operate on the surface and too fragile. A single 88 Michel would sink them. This proposal places valuable intelligence personnel in civilian vessels that offer no protection and no means of escape. Critics pointed to the obvious tactical deficiencies. British fishing trawlers of the period typically displaced 400 to 600 tons, measured 40 to 50 m in length, and achieved maximum speeds of 9 to 10 knots in calm seas. Their hulls, while sturdy enough for North Sea weather, offered zero ballistic protection. A 20 cannon round would penetrate their 8 steel plating as easily as a knife through butter. Their wireless sets, designed for short-range communication with harbor masters, lacked the power and sophistication for long-range intelligence work. Their crew accommodations, built for week-long fishing trips, couldn't support the additional intelligence personnel required for proper signals analysis. The German approach seemed far more sophisticated. The Kriegsmarine's Vorpost boot-armed TR-Wers serving as patrol vessels carried 37 anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and depth charges. They displaced 600 to 800 tons, achieved 12 knots, and operated with naval discipline and military communications. German naval theorists argued that any vessel operating in a combat zone required military capabilities. Anything less was simply placing men in floating coffins. What the Admiralty understood, and what their critics missed, was that fishing boats possessed one capability that no purpose-built intelligence vessel could match. They were supposed to be there. British fishing fleets had worked the North Sea, the Irish Sea, and the western approaches for centuries. Their presence was so mundane, so utterly ordinary that German patrol commanders literally stopped seeing them. A destroyer loitering in the MCH warranted investigation. A fishing trawler hauling nets in the same waters warranted a cursory glance through the periscope. The secret was in maintaining absolute authenticity. When the Admiralty requisitioned fishing vessels for the Special Service Program, they didn't convert them. They enhanced them whilst preserving every external characteristic that made them invisible. Cambridge, Corvey, Northern Dawn, and 63 other trawlers underwent modifications at small yards in Aberdeen, Fleetwood, and Lowestoft. Not the major naval dockyards where German spies might notice unusual activity. The intelligence equipment went into false-bottomed fish holds behind bulkheads that appeared structurally identical to the original construction. A Type 128 AIC set, normally installed in a dedicated compartment below the waterline on destroyers, was fitted into a specially constructed housing that maintained the trawler's original internal configuration. The transducer dome extended below the keel, but in a configuration that looked like reinforcement plating rather than sensor equipment. The wireless direction-finding loop aerials were disguised as radio masts identical to standard fishing boat communications equipment, distinguished only by the slightly thicker cabling that a casual observer would never notice. Power requirements presented the most significant technical challenge. The intelligence suite required 15 kW of continuous power, far more than a fishing boat standard electrical system provided. Naval architects solved this by installing auxiliary diesel generators in compartments that previously stored fishing gear with exhaust systems that vented through existing funnels. The additional fuel consumption matched what a trawler would burn whilst actively fishing, maintaining the vessel's normal operating profile. What actually mattered wasn't sophisticated disguise. It was operational discipline. Special service vessels didn't just look like fishing boats. They behaved like fishing boats. They departed port at the times fishing boats departed. They followed the same routes to the same fishing grounds. They hauled nets, real nets, which actually caught fish that were actually sold at market. Every special service vessel maintained full compliance with fishing regulations, paid harbor fees, and sold their catch through regular wholesale channels. The intelligence work happened during the night watches when fishing boats would naturally be drifting with nets deployed. The reality of combat showed that the best camouflage wasn't invisibility. It was being exactly what you appeared to be with the secret hidden in plain sight. The operational records tell the story with remarkable precision. Between October 1939 and December 1940, special service vessels operating in the MCH, the strait between the Scottish mainland and the Outer Heads, identified 127 separate U-boat transits. They provided advanced warning that enabled Royal Navy destroyers to intercept and sink U-12 on the 8th of October 1939, U-33 on the 12th of February 1940, and damage U-63 on the 25th of February 1940. German naval intelligence never connected these losses to the fishing boats that appeared in virtually every post-action sighting report. The logbook of Northern Dawn operating under Lieutenant Commander Peter Anster documents the technique with clinical precision. Entry for the 23rd of November 1939, 3:40 hours, AIC contact bearing 287 degrees, range 2,400 wide, closing profile consistent with Type 7 bubboat, maintained fishing operations 3:52 hours, target passed within 800 wide, no change in course. Direction finding indicates wireless transmission on 426.5 K, HZ 405 hours, target submerged transmitted contact report via encrypted burst transmission. What made this approach devastatingly effective wasn't just that German commanders saw fishing boats. It was that they actively dismissed them as threats. A captured Marine intelligence assessment from March 1940 recovered from U-33 specifically instructed U-boat commanders that British fishing vessels in the MCH and Western approaches maintain normal operations and present no security threat. Their wireless sets lack range to transmit contact reports, and their crews are civilian personnel, unconnected to military intelligence operations. The Germans were right about the first part and catastrophically wrong about the second. A fishing boat's standard wireless set couldn't transmit 200 m to Scarpa flow, but the military transmitter hidden in the false bulkhead could send encrypted burst transmissions that reached Portsmouth. Civilian crews couldn't operate ASDIC equipment. But the Royal Navy ratings concealed amongst the crew dressed in oilskins and speaking with a betting accent certainly could Lieutenant James Mackenzie, intelligence officer aboard Corvey, describe the operational reality in his post-war memoir. We'd haul nets at dawn exactly as a proper fishing boat would. Jerry would surface to charge batteries sometimes within half a mile. We'd wave, they'd wave back. We looked like fishermen because we were fishermen. Just fishermen with a Type 128 ASDIC set and a direct line to the submarine tracking room. The entire crew maintained the act perfectly because it wasn't an act. We genuinely caught fish, genuinely complained about the weather, genuinely followed fishing boat routines. The intelligence work simply happened in the spaces between. The numbers demonstrate the operational advantage. Between September 1939 and June 1940, special service vessels provided 387 accurate U-boat position reports. Of these, 312 were transmitted by vessels that had direct visual or wireless contact with German submarines. In 89 documented cases, U-boat commanders communicated directly with what they believed were fishing vessels, asking about weather conditions, warning them away from areas with reported mines, or simply exchanging pleasantries during surface transits. On 12 February 1940, Cambridge was approached by U-33 whilst fishing 6 milesea off the Mull of Kintyre. The U-boat commander Captain Lytton and Hans Wilhelm Fondracy came alongside and shouted warnings about British destroyers operating to the south, advising the fishing boat to move north. Sub-Lieutenant Peter Clemens, dressed in oilskins and speaking with a deliberately thick Scots accent, thanked him for the warning. 20 minutes after U-33 departed, Cambridge transmitted the submarine's exact position, course, and speed to HMS Glear. U-33 was depth-charged and sunk 6 hours later. Vendesky survived the sinking. Post-war interviews indicate he never realized the fishing boat he'd warned was the source of the intelligence that led to his vessel's destruction. This wasn't accidental operational security. The Special Service Vessel program succeeded because it exploited a fundamental principle of human perception. People see what they expect to see and dismiss anomalies that don't fit established patterns. German intelligence officers expected British spy ships to look like spy ships, modified merchant vessels with obvious intelligence-gathering equipment, operating in patterns that suggested military purpose. Fishing boats doing exactly what fishing boats had always done simply didn't register as threats. Commanders weren't clinging to civilian cover as a desperate expedient. They knew that perfect mimicry created perfect invisibility. The program's architect, Captain Godfrey, had studied German intelligence methods during his tenure as naval attaché in Berlin from 1927 to 1930. He understood that German military culture valued efficiency, order, and clear categorization. German intelligence divided vessels into neat categories: military vessels, threats; merchant vessels, targets; and civilian vessels, irrelevant. Fishing boats fell firmly into the third category, and German doctrine provided no mechanism for re-evaluating the classification. Battlefields aren't controlled environments where assets perform according to specification sheets. They're chaotic spaces where perception, expectation, and routine create opportunities for those who understand human behavior as well as military hardware. The special service vessels succeeded not despite their apparent vulnerability, but because that vulnerability made them invisible. A destroyer attracted attention. A fishing boat attracted boredom. The operational doctrine reflected this understanding. Special service vessels received explicit orders to maintain fishing operations at all times, even when not actively gathering intelligence. They competed in the same markets, responded to the same weather patterns, and followed the same seasonal movements as civilian fishing fleets. When herring season opened in the MCH, special service vessels moved to herring grounds. When weather closed the northern approaches, they sheltered in the same harbors as civilian vessels. This created a virtuous cycle of invisibility. German intelligence monitored British fishing fleet movements through signals, intercepts, coastal observations, and agent reports. Special service vessels appeared in these reports exactly as civilian fishing boats because their behavior matched civilian patterns precisely. Each confirmation that British fishing boats were behaving normally reinforced German assumptions that these vessels presented no military threat. The strategy extended to crew selection and training. The Admiralty specifically recruited intelligence personnel from fishing communities. Of the 847 Royal Navy personnel assigned to special service vessels between 1939 and 1943, 623 came from fishing families or had prior commercial fishing experience. They didn't need to learn fishing boat operations. They'd grown up with them. This wasn't just cover. It was operational necessity. A crew that fumbled basic fishing tasks would attract exactly the scrutiny the program sought to avoid. Training emphasized mundane perfection. Intelligence officers learned to mend nets, gut fish, and maintain diesel engines. Wireless operators qualified as commercial radio operators before learning military communications procedures. AIC operators spent weeks working as deck hands before touching intelligence equipment. The goal wasn't to create spies who could pretend to be fishermen. It was to create fishermen who happened to gather intelligence. The very characteristics that made fishing boats seem unsuitable for intelligence work proved to be operational advantages. Their slow speed, the 9-knot maximum that critics derided, meant they spent days or weeks in the same patrol areas, providing continuous coverage that fast vessels passing through couldn't match. A destroyer might spend 4 hours transiting the MCH. A fishing boat would work the same waters for a week, creating a persistent intelligence presence that mapped U-boat patrol patterns with extraordinary precision. Their lack of armament paradoxically increased their safety. Armed vessels attracted attack. Fishing boats attracted indifference. Between September 1939 and May 1945, special service vessels conducted 4,127 operational patrols in waters actively patrolled by U-boat and surface raiders. They were attacked exactly 7 times, a survival rate of 99.8%. By comparison, dedicated intelligence trawlers operated by the French Navy in 1939 to 1940, which carried defensive airmen and flew naval ensign, suffered a 34% loss rate before the program was abandoned. The fishing boat surface operations, seemingly a vulnerability, enabled intelligence gathering impossible from submerged platforms. U-boats surfaced regularly to charge batteries, communicate with headquarters, and transit at higher speeds. During these surface periods, they were visible to fishing boats that had every legitimate reason to be in the same waters. A submarine hunting for enemy warships would see a fishing boat and immediately dismiss it as tactically irrelevant. That dismissal created the intelligence window wireless direction finding, one of the war's most valuable intelligence techniques, required surface platforms with precisely calibrated antenna arrays. The special service vessels, modified radio masts disguised as standard communications equipment, provided ideal platforms for this work. Between 1940 and 1943, fishing boat direction finding operations provided the raw data that enabled the submarine tracking room to map German patrol patterns with such precision that convoys could be routed around known submarine concentrations. The technical specifications tell the story. A standard British fishing trawler's wireless mast stood 12 to 15 m above the waterline, tall enough for effective direction-finding work, but unremarkable in a vessel that needed long-range radio for weather reports and harbor communications. The modified masts on special service vessels added only 80 cm of height, fitted with additional stays that appeared to be structural reinforcement, but actually held the direction-finding loop in precise orientation. The difference was invisible to visual observation, but provided a 35% improvement in bearing accuracy over standard naval direction-finding equipment. Power generation, the supposed limiting factor, proved manageable through clever engineering. The auxiliary generators installed in former equipment storage spaces generated 18 kW, enough for continuous ASDIC operation, wireless monitoring, and encrypted burst transmissions. The additional diesel consumption raised the vessel's fuel budget from 22 L/hour to 31 L, well within the normal variation for fishing boats operating under different sea conditions and loading. Even the fishing boat's steel hulls, which offered no ballistic protection, provided unexpected advantages. The AIM hull plating had no ferrognetic signature, significantly different from civilian vessels, making them effectively invisible to German magnetic detection equipment. Purpose-built intelligence vessels with their reinforced hulls and military equipment generated magnetic signatures that could be detected by swept-channel magnetic sensors. Fishing boats passed through these defensive zones without triggering alarms because their magnetic signatures matched the thousands of civilian fishing vessels that transited the same channels every year. By mid-1940, the Special Service Vessel Program success led to mission expansion. The vessels that began as passive intelligence gatherers evolved into active participants in anti-submarine warfare. The turning point came in May 1940, when Northern Dawn detected U-13 on the surface in the MCH, transmitted its position, and maintained contact for 7 hours until HMS Walpole arrived to engage the fishing boat's persistent presence, completely unthreatening to the U-boat commander, enabled the destruction of a submarine that might otherwise have escaped. This success prompted a tactical evolution. Special service vessels began carrying concealed depth charges in fish holes, ready for deployment if a U-boat surfaced within range. The depth charges were stored in containers identical to the wooden boxes used for storing fishing gear, with quick release mechanisms that allowed deployment within 90 seconds. The vessels didn't hunt U-boat. That would have compromised their cover, but they could attack targets of opportunity when circumstances permitted. The first such attack occurred on the 17th of August 1940, when Cambridgeshire encountered U-57 on the surface 8 mi off Barrhead. The U-boat had surfaced to repair a damaged diesel exhaust and was stationary with crew members visible on deck. Sublieutenant Clemens made the decision to maintain fishing operations whilst maneuvering to within 400 wide close enough for depth charge deployment. At 5:20 hours, Cambridge released 6 depth charges set for 50 FT detonation whilst maintaining the appearance of normal fishing operations. The explosions damaged U-57's pressure hull, forcing it to the surface where it was engaged and sunk by RAF Coastal Command aircraft, responding to Cambridge's radio alert. German after-action reports from U-boat commanders who survived special service vessel attacks reveal complete confusion about the nature of the threat. A report from Captain Lieutenant Wilhelm Kleinman, commander of U-11, which survived a depth-charge attack in the Irish Sea in November 1940, describes sudden explosion, source unknown, and speculates about British mines or a new type of aerial bomb. The possibility that a fishing boat had attacked his submarine literally didn't occur to him. By 1942, special service vessels had expanded their mission to include minefield reconnaissance. German magnetic and acoustic mines posed significant threats to convoy routes, but their precise locations remained uncertain. Fishing boats, which could legitimately operate in shallow coastal waters where naval vessels rarely ventured, became ideal platforms for mapping mine distributions. They carried modified AIC sets tuned to detect the distinctive magnetic signatures of bottom mines, creating detailed charts of German defensive minefields without arousing suspicion. The technique was devastatingly effective. Between January 1942 and June 1943, special service vessels mapped 37 separate German minefields around the British coast, providing intelligence that enabled minesweepers to clear 847 individual mines. The fishing boats conducting this reconnaissance sailed through waters that German intelligence believed were effectively defended, because defensive strategy assumed that any vessel conducting reconnaissance would be obviously military, and therefore targetable. Fishing boats were civilian vessels conducting legitimate business, even when that business included precisely mapping the positions of naval mines. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Special Service Vessel program was its sustained operational security. Despite operating continuously from September 1939 through May 1945, despite conducting thousands of intelligence-gathering missions, despite providing information that led directly to dozens of U-boat sinkings, German naval intelligence never identified these vessels as military assets. Captured German documents from various stages of the war consistently categorize British fishing boats as civilian vessels of no intelligence concern. Marine Intelligence Summary from December 1942, 3 full years into the program, notes that British fishing operations continue in traditional areas despite U-boat activity, demonstrating either remarkable courage or remarkable stupidity from civilian fishermen. The possibility that these were intelligence operations never appears in German assessments. This blindness wasn't due to German incompetence. Marine intelligence services were sophisticated and effective. They successfully identified numerous British intelligence operations, including several genuinely secret programs. They simply couldn't conceive that fishing boats, vessels so completely ordinary, so perfectly mundane, could be military assets. The cognitive framework that served German intelligence well in identifying unusual activities made them blind to threats hidden in perfect normality. The program maintained security through absolute consistency. When crew members went ashore, they behaved exactly as fishing crews behaved. They drank in the same pubs, complained about the same things, and maintained the same relationships with civilian fishing communities. Special service vessels were maintained at the same civilian repair yards that serviced commercial fishing fleets. Their intelligence equipment repairs happened at night, conducted by Royal Navy technicians who arrived without uniform and departed before dawn. Even the vessel's financial arrangements maintained civilian appearance. They paid civilian harbor fees, purchased fuel through civilian suppliers, and maintained accounts with civilian wholesale fish merchants. The deception extended to the fish themselves. Special service vessels sold their catches through normal market channels at normal prices, competing with civilian vessels. The Royal Navy subsidized the program's operating costs, but the fishing operations themselves needed to generate plausible revenue to maintain cover. In 1943, the Special Service Vessel fleet collectively landed 8,400 tons of fish worth 127,000 pounds, enough to make them credible as commercial operations, but not so successful as to attract unusual attention. What made the Special Service Vessel program succeed wasn't any single technical feature or tactical innovation. It was the recognition that the most effective disguise isn't an elaborate fiction. It's authentic normality with secrets hidden in plain sight. Military planners traditionally approach deception as a layer of falsehood applied over military reality. Camouflage paint, fake radio traffic, dummy installations. The Special Service vessels inverted this approach. They were genuinely fishing boats operated by people from fishing communities, conducting actual fishing operations. The military intelligence function existed as a hidden layer beneath completely authentic civilian activity. This principle extended beyond mere operational security. It created a self-reinforcing cycle, where each verification of the vessel's apparent civilian nature strengthened enemy assumptions. German intelligence monitored British fishing fleet radio traffic, tracked vessel movements through coastal observation, and analyzed catch landings through agents at fish markets. Every data point confirmed that British fishing boats were behaving exactly as fishing boats should behave. This comprehensive confirmation made the possibility of military intelligence operations literally unthinkable within German analytical frameworks. The psychological dimension proved as important as the technical execution. Human intelligence analysis relies on pattern recognition, identifying anomalies that indicate unusual activity. The Special Service vessels generated no anomalies. Their movements matched historical fishing patterns. Their radio traffic matched civilian norms. Their behavior matched expectations without anomalies to trigger investigation. They remained invisible, not because they couldn't be seen, but because they perfectly matched the background noise of normal civilian activity. Post-war analysis by British intelligence services identified the Special Service Vessel program as one of the war's most cost-effective intelligence operations. The total program cost approximately $2.7 million, including vessel modifications, personnel costs, and operational expenses. The intelligence provided contributed to operations that destroyed enemy assets valued at over £45 million and prevented convoy losses estimated at $120 million. More significantly, the sustained intelligence coverage enabled strategic planning that would have been impossible with intermittent or compromised intelligence sources. The program's success influenced post-war intelligence doctrine across multiple nations. The principle of hiding intelligence operations within completely authentic civilian activity became a cornerstone of covert operations planning. The understanding that the best cover story isn't a story at all. It's genuine civilian activity with secret purposes hidden beneath shaped Cold War intelligence operations and remains relevant in contemporary intelligence practice. By May 1945, when the last Special Service vessel completed its final patrol, these fishing boats had fundamentally altered the intelligence war in the Atlantic and coastal waters. They'd provided 4,127 U-boat sighting reports, mapped 112 German minefields, intercepted over 47,000 wireless transmissions, and directly contributed to the destruction of 37 enemy submarines. They'd accomplished this whilst losing exactly 3 vessels to enemy action, all to aircraft attack that would have destroyed any vessel regardless of type. German naval intelligence in their final war assessment completed in May 1945 never mentioned British fishing boats as intelligence assets. In the comprehensive post-war debriefing of German intelligence officers conducted by Allied intelligence